Our 2026 Alumni Collection speaker, Alan A. Symonette, a member of the great class of 1976. Alan has spent his career at the heart of the labor and employment disputes that so often shape our professional and civic lives. As a premier labor and employment arbitrator, Alan deals in the high-stakes reality of conflict resolution. He has navigated disputes across nearly every major American industry, from airlines and utilities to healthcare and higher education. His peers have repeatedly looked to him for leadership, electing him president of the National Academy of Arbitrators and a fellow and former president of the College of Labor and Employment Lawyers. Beyond his legal career, Alan has been an integral part of Swarthmore since his time as a resident in the Black Cultural Center. Whether serving as president of the Alumni Council, a member of the Board of Managers, or on the Council of Presidential Initiatives, he has worked to ensure that the responsibility of caring for this community remains a priority for every generation. His service extends to his professional life as well. Alan is a founding director of the Ray Corollary Initiative, an organization dedicated to fostering more diversity and inclusion among neutrals, the impartial arbitrators and mediators who resolve legal disputes outside of a courtroom. This field, known as alternative dispute resolution, relies on the fairness of these individual experts. Through this initiative, Alan is working to ensure that the professionals who resolve our society's conflicts reflect the diversity of the people they serve. Please join me in welcoming Alan A. Symonette.
Good morning. First, I want to take a moment to congratulate and thank our Alumni Service Award winners. Each of you are an inspiration to us in all your work in reconciling communities here at Swarthmore, in speaking truth to power, and working in the medical field. I personally, sincerely appreciate what you are doing for our community. Now, Val, thank you so much for this introduction. This is a great honor to have the opportunity to reflect on my Swarthmore experience and how it has driven my passion for workplace dispute resolution and community. The notion for the title of this talk, Rooted, came to me from an annual tradition here in Southeast Pennsylvania. During the first week of March, the Philadelphia Horticultural Society holds a flower show. Around here, the flower show is a rite of spring. After a Philadelphia winter of snow, ice, and of course, potholes, one would step out of the cold into a convention hall full of flower presentations. Rooted was the title of this year's show, reflecting one's shared roots of horticulture in history, family, and community. This is also the metaphor that has represented my relationship with this college. Val, in your letter announcing the end of your tenure as the 15th president of Swarthmore, you shared your reaction upon setting foot on this campus, walking past the Rose Garden and looking down Paris Beach. You said that it, and I quote, stirred a sense that the college was speaking to me, not simply through its beauty, but through the story embedded in its people. I had the unmistakable sensation that I had found my place, unquote. I'm not sure, but I think that may have been the evening in which you were presented as the next president of this college. I was there that day. I received a call from Marilyn Hollifield. She simply told me to drop whatever I was doing, make it to campus, and that I was not going to be disappointed. I knew Marilyn from my years of involvement in the college. We were friendly. To me, she is a legend. She was one of the 7 sisters who helped establish Black identity at Swarthmore. And at that time, Marilyn was on the board of managers. When Marilyn asks you to be somewhere, you roll out. When I arrived at Eldridge Commons, another significant name in the roots of Black identity here at Swarthmore, many members of the Black Swarthmore community was there. There were members of my class in the audience. I saw former Dean Janet Dickerson in the room and drifted over to her. I soon realized the anticipation when your parents, Val, walked into the room. I realized that something that was happening that I would not have realized in my wildest dreams. You were being introduced as president. I began to cry. So did Janet. And then Janet leaned over to me and whispered that all of this is standing on our, meaning our Black community's shoulders. At that point, I had about lost it. I tell that story, Val, because your words in your recent letter mirrored my impression when I arrived on campus in the fall of 1971. I was a kid from Chicago. I had never previously heard of Swarthmore. I was more interested in small Midwestern liberal arts schools. I was given the option to interview on campus. That presented an opportunity for me to visit the East Coast and would be my second experience flying in my life. So I decided to go. It was supposed to be a typical visit. I was to meet with the admissions officer and then wait to be hosted by a student for the night. So after the interview, I went to sit on the bench outside at the time the first floor admissions office in Parrish and await my host. As I sat, a group of Black students were traversing through the hall. They stopped in front of me. They promptly said, "Who are you?" I explained to them that I was interviewing here and I was waiting for my host. They promptly said, "Forget that, you're with us." That was my first introduction to community at Swarthmore. I had a great time that evening socializing with students. I stayed overnight in Willits, which had and still maybe has the thinnest walls on campus. And that connection was important, but it was the first of several connections that I experienced through Swarthmore. For me, the locus of this community was the BCC, which we affectionately call the house. It was a location where one could feel at home. The house was also where I met my late wife, Deborah Pender, of the class of 1978. If you visit the house, you will first pass a terracotta urn created by Professor of Studio Arts Emeritus Sid Carpenter at my request. It represents our connection to each other and to that place. We have our favorite places of connection on campus, be it the old or new Tarble, McCabe Library, or many of the classrooms or laboratories. For me, I lived in Trotter. We forged relationships over late night study on our hall. Regularly, someone would come around to inform us that someone's placing an order for a delivery of steaks or pizza from Apollo's. Someone would make the call, 565-3883, and don't ask me how I know that number. The food was delivered, We paid our portion, we had a break over steaks or pizza, and continued our work. Now, if we are honest with ourselves, succeeding academically at Swarthmore, and I underestimate this, was a challenge. But it was those relationships with friends, professors, and workers here that sustained us. In my frustration as a student, I would find myself in some professor's office like David Rosen in math, sometimes in tears seeking direction. Ken Sharp worked through one of my papers under a tree outside one of the lodges after a seminar. He helped me understand my often confused and disorganized thoughts and somehow helped me to calm down, reorganize, and place them onto paper. I never really appreciated that rootedness of this sort of community until after I graduated and started attending law school. It was when I attended law school, I was the only male out of 3 black students in a class of over 300. It was not a welcoming place. In fact, during my first year, many of my peers openly said that I did not belong there, that I was taking a spot that belonged to a more qualified white person. This was the time when law school was a place where students were competing for treasured spots in law firms, and I was the competition. I had never experienced this. Learning could be challenging, but here at Swarthmore, we were never pitched against each other. However, one classmate from Swarthmore attended with me. His name is Phil Hyde. He and I worked together, especially during my first year. Eventually, we graduated together and studied for the bar together and were groomsmen in each other's wedding. He is no longer with us, and I and many of my classmates miss him. Now, my dedication to workers' rights and workplace due process is also rooted in Swarthmore. You see, I'm a proud son of the Great Migration, and I'm also a proud son of what people label as working parents. Growing up, my father, who raised me, was a refinery worker at Standard Oil of Indiana, and my mother was an office administrator for the federal government. I lived in a neighborhood of firefighters, teachers, post office workers, and city employees. During my second year at Swarthmore, I contacted the career office and joined the extern program. At that time, students could sign up for experiences during spring break and shadow an alum in their desired profession. I ended up shadowing Stephen Rubin, class of 1957. He was an attorney in a Chicago law firm that represented unions and their members. Their clients were like my parents. I understood their concerns about work. The attorneys there showed me the practice, taught me the fundamentals like legal research and writing legal memoranda. Since then, I worked for them every summer and every spring break through law school. So during those difficult days in law school, I was not looking for just any legal job in any law firm, but to be engaged in issues in the workplace. The extern program provided me with an incredible opportunity. In recognizing the power of the connections and mentoring generated by these encounters, I have sponsored externs every year for at least the last 15 years and continue to seek students who are interested in labor relations and workplace dispute resolution. I have kept in touch with many of them. You all have something that ignites your passion in your work or your practice in a lab or in a field. I strongly encourage you to share that experience with a student. Many of you recall that Martin Luther King once called Sunday mornings, quote, the most segregated day of the week. The workplace, by contrast, is where people across the ethnic, religious, and generational spectrum must come together to generate a product, provide a service, and generate an income for themselves and their families. People normally define themselves by their day-to-day pursuits. I have been engaged in workplace disputes first as an advocate for workers, management, and finally as a labor arbitrator for 46 years. And admittedly, I am concerned about the future of workplaces in our society. Advocates must understand, whoops, you skip a page sometime. As an arbitrator, I am called to render judgment in a workplace issue that may involve the interpretation of a collectively bargained contract language, or ensuring due process for an employee disciplined or terminated from employment, and in the case of interest arbitration, helping to draft the language of the agreement itself. In most, if not all cases, my decision is considered final and binding. This is an awesome responsibility. However, no matter how and what I decide, I, as an arbitrator, must do my best to maintain the relationship between labor and management. This is based on a common understanding in our community that regardless of the nature of the dispute, after the decision is made, the parties have to return to the workplace and continue to work together. Advocates must understand that if one disparages or degrades another party, one will always certainly have to face that person or one of their colleagues the next day. So in labor relations, one must practice what I call interpersonal or relational advocacy. We may disagree sometimes, but overall, the relationship matters. This is what I try to follow in every dispute and in every encounter. In Quaker teaching, that means the recognition of God in everyone you encounter. For me, as an arbitrator, my practice must be founded in due process and fairness, and by all means to do no harm to the relationship. Out of everything that I may have learned here, and as a child of working parents, is that work has value and should be respected. Unfortunately, most of the turmoil and mistrust that we encounter as a society is based upon transactional relationships. What can you do for me now? I had always found it ironic in the time of COVID that our government labeled those as essential workers, those who they thought were necessary to the economy. Those non-essential folks like me got to stay home out of harm's way. Yet those facing the most risk were in most cases those who were the least paid, worked the longest hours, and were insecure in their benefits and child care. When you approach individuals on a transactional basis, they become fungible. They become the labels that we choose to place on them based upon their identity, the nature of their work, or their political views. In the last chapter of her book, Caste, author Isabel Wilkerson described an encounter with a plumber she called to diagnose the cause of water in her basement. It was just after the election of 2016. She was a recent widow, and her mother had passed shortly before the encounter. She needed to get away to grieve her loss, so she was packing for a trip to Argentina just because she had never been there. But now she was sweeping water in her basement. This is how she described the plumber who answered the door. He smelled like beer and tobacco. He was wearing a cap like the men at the rallies who wanted to make America great again, the people who had prevailed in the election the month before. His belly extended over his belt buckle. The years had carved lines into his face, and stubble was poking through his chin and cheeks. He let out a phlegmy cough. When she opened the door, he was condescending, not believing that she, a black woman, could own such a nice house in a prestigious neighborhood. She described the look he gave her as, quote, "Let's get this over with." He was firing questions at her while she continued to move the water that had flooded her basement. She was tired and grieving. It was the holidays, and she was still getting over an election, the result of which she did not like and could not get over. So out of desperation, she threw, quote, threw a Hail Mary at his humanity. She told the plumber that her mother died the prior week and asked him if his mother was still alive. The plumber admitted that his mother died in 1991 at the age of 52 years old. His father was still alive, living in a nursing home, and, according to the plumber, as mean as they come. Eventually, they formed a relationship over the impact of the deaths of their mothers. Later, the plumber found the source of the problem, a bad water heater which had leaked over a long period of time. He neutralized the situation, provided an estimate for the replacement, and charged a fee for the diagnosis, which she thought was fair. They wished each other a happy holiday and left. Less than an hour later, the plumber returned because he wanted to make sure the gas to the water heater was shut off so it would not be heating an empty tank. So as he was leaving, he noticed a damp box of Polaroids that she had salvaged. He said as he was leaving, "Oh, you want those? That's memories right there," and left. I was moved by that encounter at the end of her book. It exemplifies that those connections, whenever we find them, can only provide a better foundation for us as a society. We all have many points of commonality. Sometimes we just have to take the time and have the patience to find them rather than reach conclusions based on how they look and where they live. I'm grateful for the honor of working with communities of workers and managers in several industries, from airlines to law enforcement to healthcare to utilities. None of these organizations can succeed without the community of workers and managers who recognize their general mission and work toward the collective goal. I just believe that the collective bargaining process evens the balance between worker and employer. When the employment relationship is no more than a pact over performance and compensation, the commitment and loyalty is lost. People used to work for years and maybe decades, not just because of the pay and the benefits, but to a commitment to the organization and its mission. These days, I am concerned that we are slowly losing our commitment to anything that can bind us together as a society. I think it's critical that communities must be affirmative and deliberate in maintaining the trust between workers and managers, communities and their political leaders, and college administrators and their students. Relationships matter. I have been thinking a lot about what a community grounded in giving value to every individual would look like. One of my more significant areas of study here was the history of South Africa. Our African history class spent a large amount of time studying the Black resistance to apartheid in the 1970s. I finally had an opportunity to visit the country as an arbitrator in 1999. Now, Section 23 of their Constitution, passed in 1995, extends the right to fair labor practices and due process to any and all workers. Imagine that. During my first visit, I consulted with the Commission on Conciliation, Mediation, and Arbitration. This is an administrative tribunal that resolves all employment matters first through conciliation and/or mediation, and then through arbitration with its decisions appealable to their labor court. I was there to consult with the new mediators and arbitrators in the country. This was also the time when the country was undergoing the Truth and Reconciliation process, which tried to reunite a society torn apart by the atrocities of apartheid. I always wondered what it was about a people they could try to seek reconciliation through truth-telling and forgiveness. I have visited the country 3 times since then, and I finally learned the name for the philosophy that helped these people move forward. The term is Ubuntu. It originated from a Southern African philosophy which describes what happens when we connect with other people and share a sense of humanity. When we take the time to listen deeply and experience an emotional bond, and when we treat ourselves and other people with the dignity they deserve. In my view, this is richer than following the golden rule. With Ubuntu, everyone has value and we are all connected. I am only because you are. This is a concept that can be embodied in a place like Swarthmore. Swarthmore is not just about our passion for learning, or its facilities, or its outstanding faculty. We recognize that most of our success rests in our rooted connections. We remember our relationships because it is through those connections that we share our passion. We encourage each other. We listen and we trust each other. And most of all, we forgive each other. That way, we become better people who can help find peace and reconciliation whenever our journeys take us. Thank you very much.